Welcome to the Ebb and Glow podcast. I'm your host, Jenelle Tremblett, and I'm a firm believer that even when life doesn't go as planned, it is taking you exactly where you're meant to be. On this podcast, I'm here to help you finally release control of what you think you want and begin to just trust in the ebbs and flows of life. Each week, I will show you how to build that positive mindset, radiate with self-confidence, and cultivate an unshakable resilience. Let me prove to you that even when life ebbs, you will glow.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Ebb and Glow podcast. You're listening to episode 107 with my guest, Tomás Garza, and here we are to chat about the topics of growing up with an alcoholic mother, having resentment because of that, and eventually learning to forgive. So I'm excited for you to listen to today's episode. If you're listening today and have grown up with an alcoholic in your life, or maybe you have one now, I'm sure you'll understand the pain that Tomás has grown up with and how that leads to a lot of the other decisions that you make in your life. He speaks about in this episode that his first marriage, he attracted a partner into his life that was very similar to his mom. And while we don't dive into that a lot in this episode, I'm sure it's clear why he attracted that in. And he says, you really go after what you're familiar with. It's all you know. And he talks a lot about growing up in just chaos at all times and thinking that that was normal. And it wasn't until he started going to his friends' houses that he realized, this is not a normal upbringing. But the interesting part of it is that he was comfortable in the chaos, and this led him down to a path of a career in family mediation. So the type of career where you're watching parents fight over custody of kids, you're watching a lot of horrific things within families and a lot of toxicity. And he says that ultimately led into his everyday personal life as well. It's hard to kind of leave that at the office, you know? It can take a really big emotional toll of you. And then we further chat about in the conversation of how he realized in his 40s that he was definitely living a life with a lot of depression. And I'm sure it's obvious why, given his upbringing. But he kind of had high functioning depression and didn't realize it. Long story short, this led him down to a path of real spirituality, and he is a teacher of a book called A Course in Miracles. So if you haven't read that before, I highly recommend. I've read it myself, and it really taught me the joy of forgiveness and the benefits of forgiveness without ever needing the other person to realize that you are forgiving them. You get a lot more benefits just kind of not needing that closure and validation of the forgiveness. So we chat a lot about that as well. As you can hear in my voice, I'm excited for this episode. It has a lot of depth to it and a lot of topics and themes that I think could benefit you in any area of your life, whether or not you've had a similar childhood, because the theme and the learning of forgiveness, being able to forgive without the other person knowing, can bring so much light to your life and allow you to live a very different life than when you're harboring that resentment and that hatred and that anger. I can only speak for myself. Forgiving people without getting the closure has changed my life a lot. And you'll realize as you grow through these types of things that as you realize that what once triggered you in life doesn't trigger you anymore, you'll notice the growth in yourself. Wow, should I be a teacher of A Course in Miracles? Anyways, kind of half of a joke. Anyways, I want to tell you a quick little bit about who our guest is, and then we'll jump into it. So Reverend Tomás Garza is a teacher of A Course in Miracles and an author, spiritual coach, and mentor. He enjoys guiding people through the process of deep personal transformation, meaning he loves to turn on a camera and microphone and share his experience. As a child of an alcoholic mother, Tomás has leaned heavily on spiritual practice and its lessons to navigate some serious ebbs and flows in life. He is happy to share in great detail how the power of forgiveness can radically transform your life just as it has his. An avid hiker and lover of hot, sunny climates, Reverend Tomás lives with his wife, Cindy, in Surprise, Arizona. That's such a cool city name. All that being said, I'm super excited you're here listening to today's episode. If you prefer to watch this on YouTube, you can absolutely do that. And if you are loving today's episode and have gained value from it, share it along with someone who will also gain value from it. Okay, wherever you are today, have an amazing day and enjoy the episode. Thank you so much for being here and welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to this.
Yeah, we got connected initially because I knew you were such a practicer of the Course in Miracles. And even though I still haven't finished the book, there's still probably like a 25% left of the book for me. I said to you, wow, that's probably one of the top 5 books in my life that have changed my life so radically, clearly. And it's phenomenal that one book can do that and change your perspective on so many areas of your life. And I mean, you practice it and teach it all the time. So you know for sure.
Yeah, it really is remarkable. To say it's had a huge influence in my life is the biggest understatement of them all.
And how old were you? Like what part of your life and what point of your life did you first hear about A Course in Miracles?
Oh, well, the really interesting thing is I've been interested in spirituality my entire life. I've had various different career lives and been involved in a lot of different things, but that's the one subject that I always kept coming back to and always has meant more to me than anything else. And even though A Course in Miracles is now the centerpiece of my own practice, I didn't really hear about it until about 2010, 2011, wow. And only then in passing where I would see a printed reference to it. And somebody was always talking about how deep it was, an occasional comment about how wonderful it was and how it had changed somebody. But I didn't pick it up until 2013, actually.
I mean, as we talked about when we first chatted, I kept hearing about it all the time as well. And even on podcasts and anyone who's kind of gotten through anything in their life, they always say, reading A Course in Miracles really helped me. And it was still kind of in the back of my mind on a to be read in the future list. And I find with anything in life, the moment you get that desire, that real deep urge to be like, okay, now is the time to read it, is usually when you need it the most.
Well, and it really was for me. It was 2013 was in a time of really, really great career transition for me as well. I had been a family mediator, so a very, very high stakes child custody and parenting time mediator, working with divorcing parents, grieving parents.
So ugly days.
Ugly, very ugly days. And I would have 5 or 6 sessions in a row because I was very, very busy. And the toxicity level had built up to the point where I had been ready to go for years by the time 2013 rolled around, and kept delaying it because I was doing very well.
Hard to leave the money. Yeah.
I mean, it was really difficult. And I would type the old-fashioned resignation letters and stick them in a drawer. And I would compose emails and make sure I saved them to a draft rather than hit send. But I had several of those, and I'd come back to them and revise them every few months, and never did send them. And that's where I was in 2013, was nearing the end, well overdue. And
How overdue? How many years do you think? 5, 6 years?
At least. It was a career that I had for about 13 years. And I think probably half that time, I would have been really well served by getting out.
Are you the type of person that can hide that though? I know for me, if I'm not in it, you'll see it all over my face. I can't fake it. But obviously you're still successful for the other half.
Yeah, I think that I did an okay job for certain people. For the world, for the court system, which sent me the majority of my cases, for the judges and all of the people that worked at the courthouse and my colleagues, I think I was pretty good at keeping up appearances. But for those who know me personally, my then girlfriend, now wife, well, it was a completely different story, because I would inevitably bring some of that home with me.
I would be miserable. if I were you. Like it's hard to wipe all of that toxicity and negative emotion at the end of the day.
Mhm.
I wouldn't be able to compartmentalize it at all.
Well, I would, I think that I was only able to do it up to a certain point,
Yeah.
and I finally hit my limit around 2013 was where I was hitting that limit, yet clinging on and refusing to let it go, which I
Yeah.
think a lot of us do in, well, various aspects of our lives, relationships, our careers, anything. Yeah.
Hmm. I'm curious, and I don't know if there is a correlation, but everything that you went through as a child, did that lead you to that type of career?
Yes.
Mm.
Most definitely. Yeah.
I was wondering, I'm like, it could be such an obvious correlation that it might actually not be a correlation, but I guess it is a correlation.
Well, it is. I've always, for reasons that I never really was able to explain, I've always been that person that people come to and just share.
Mm.
They just share. And sometimes it's a dump of
Yeah.
emotions and feelings. And sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's really constructive. But even from a young age, I was always, I think, a safe space for
Mm.
people to share. So I think that it was a quite natural progression to
Hmm.
wind up there.
I don't want to dig too much into this because this is not what this is about, but the majority of your cases were they probably ugly, or was there any good days of working
Mm.
as a mediator?
There were several. There were
Okay.
several good days. Paycheck days were
Yeah.
great, of course. Those were, some of them were really good. And that was nice. Keep you in the game type nice.
It's always
But,
the kids that get
yeah.
the brunt of the
Yes.
awfulness, though.
Yes, there were several very, very good outcomes. I mean, we actually resolved a really high percentage of the cases. It was probably upward of 60% of them resolved. And we literally saved the court system
Mm.
millions and millions of dollars.
And hours, yeah.
Yes, and saved the families hours. And there were several good outcomes, but also mixed in with that is the sheer toxicity and
Mm.
brutality. And I've heard things that I didn't think I would ever hear, that you really
Wow.
can't make it up. It's strange and highly bizarre. And I would see the same people over and over again.
Same
Someone would
types or same actual person?
Same actual people.
Oh,
Most
goodness.
of this took place in a town called McMinnville, Oregon, which is south
Okay.
and west of Portland. It's about 35,000 people.
Okay.
And I saw the same people over and over.
Hey, what do you make about that? It's
I
not,
think,
there's a common denominator here.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think that I would see the same people that would lose their case, whether they wanted to sue for custody or revise a parenting time arrangement or whatever it was. They would lose their case, get up enough money to file for a modification, which is suing the other parent again. And
Again.
9 to 10 months later, they'd be referred to mediation again, and those never resolved. And what made it even worse is, it's not a big city, so I would see them at the grocery store. I would see
Ugh.
people in the park, in the gas station, and here I am with a sign on my head saying, "Tell me all your problems. It's okay. I won't judge." And they would start telling me about their ex at the park or
At the
in
grocery
line
store,
at the grocery
exactly.
store. Yeah.
Getting free labor from you.
Right. And, it doesn't matter how often I had to say, well, I really am not at liberty to discuss that. And what I really wanted to say was, that'll be $200. Why don't you just
Yes,
schedule a session? We'll see you on Monday.
please.
Cash.
Yeah, and we'll see how badly you really want to talk about this.
Exactly. And the answer was usually not at all.
Nope.
They were
They
done.
just wanted to rant.
Yeah, they were done. But, I've always been that person that people, I think it's okay. It's a good
I think
thing.
you have the sign on your face.
I
Dump your
do.
problems on me.
It says problem solver right here.
Or at least problem listener.
Yes, we're kind of joking about it, but that's actually, it's been a really helpful skill to have for sure.
It makes you know a lot of things about a lot of people.
I do. And I can't say,
Nope.
even to this day.
You have the vault of the Oregon small town secrets. What's
Yes,
going on?
and I did get out of that career in 2013. So all of the statute of limitations had passed where I would possibly be hauled into court to testify, which rarely happened anyway.
Yeah.
All of that fun stuff, that's all passed. I've gotten to destroy my records now. And
Yeah. And
I'm
almost
glad.
completely close that chapter, which I'm sure is a great feeling.
Oh, it was beautiful.
Yeah. It's like that part of my life complete. Let's move on.
Yes, exactly.
I want to talk about your upbringing a lot because a lot of what you do and a lot of what you did as a mediator links to the childhood you grew up with. So for anyone listening today, so you grew up as a child of an alcoholic mother, and anyone who has been around any type of alcoholic, whether it's a parent, whether it's a grandparent, whether it's a significant other or a sibling, it takes a toll on you. And as being the alcoholic, it hurts everyone else way more than it hurts you, as you know. Yes. So my first question to you is, at what age do you think you started realizing that your mom was an alcoholic?
Oh, I was young. I think I pieced all of that together when I was probably 6.
Wow.
Yeah.
How does
7.
Someone that young piece it together that what's happening is wrong?
Well, it's the behavior. It's the violent mood swings, the tirades, and the passing out. That's the behavior. And this is something that she would do. She did this for years, is start drinking pretty early in the day. Not first thing in the morning, but by 10 or 11 o'clock, if she was at home, she would already be well into her jug of wine. I knew where it was. She kept it underneath the sink as though to hide it from somebody, but we all knew where it was. And
kids are not dumb.
Nah, I mean, we're observant.
Yeah.
And we get into things. And I was no different.
Yeah.
I was very curious. So I was able to piece together the wine with what seemed to be just out of the blue violence and tirades, followed by passing out.
Yeah.
And it was a regular occurrence when I was really young. I remember it happening 2 or 3 days a week.
Wow.
And then as we got older, as my younger sister and I got older, got into high school, it began to happen more frequently to where it was almost daily.
Was she the only parent in the household growing up?
Not at first. My dad and she were together until I was 8, and he worked quite a bit. He was an orthopedic surgeon and was gone all the time. So, he would come home sometimes and be there, and then they would have a really, really big argument. Yeah, I love them both. They weren't a good match in any way at all.
And this is a separate conversation, but yeah, kids from the very beginning know their parents are not a good match.
Yes, that was clearly evident. So he was gone. We were with her a lot of the time. And then, of course, we'd go off to school and have activities. And we were both, my younger sister and I were both really social. So we had friends. And this was the 1970s, where it's a lot different than today. They just said, okay, come back when it's dark.
Yeah.
And we would wander for hours and hours, completely unsupervised, of course. So.
It's interesting that you bring up the point of time that this is happening, the 1970s. Do you think, this is a weird question of mine, but I want to go with it.
Okay.
Do you think having an alcoholic parent in the 1970s as opposed to this day and age is very different?
I think that the surface level of it might be, but the content is exactly the same. The disease is exactly the same. And the internal hurt that drives that person into that addiction is the same.
And the trauma that it causes everyone around them is
that's exactly the same as well. Just takes different outward forms, but the substance of it is exactly the same.
Yeah. The reason why I asked that question is it's more like in the 1970s, growing up as a kid, I grew up in the 90s and early 2000s. So even then, 20 years ago, like you could go out all day long, and as long as you were home before dark, no one questioned it. But I feel like parents these days are a little bit more involved in your life and knowing where you are. So having almost an absentee parent is almost a little bit more noticeable, where I think people are questioning it a bit more, say like teachers and other parents, and noticing.
Yeah.
A little bit more gossipy, maybe this day
Yes.
and age.
In a sense. And there's
Yeah.
also, I mean, you can see that both ways, because also these kids, and I've got two teenagers, they have been more, they were born in the 2000s. They've been more protected than I was, in a good way.
Okay.
There are anti-bullying
Yeah.
campaigns at school, which is excellent. It's excellent. And there, with that additional supervision has come a little bit of added security, yet at the same time, it can be overstepped like anything.
What did you notice about your and your sister's childhood and day-to-day life that you realized was so much different than your friends' lives if you went over to your friends' parents and stuff?
I didn't at first notice the difference. That was something I noticed my mom drinking when I was 6 or 7, but it was probably a few years after the fact where I really, really became acutely aware that we weren't normal. As a kid, I thought, well, you think, okay, the whole world revolves around us, and this is where the action is. Yeah, it's where it's at, and this is the way it is. And it was, of course, full of strife, full of drama, conflict, hostility. And I began to notice that other people didn't have that they were loving, and that their parents weren't drunk, in fact, at 2 p.m. And various things like that. Yeah, I began to realize, probably when I was in high school, that I had become so used to hostility that I thought it normal. And I actually remember myself being uncomfortable at some of my friends' houses.
Because they were so normal and calm?
Yes, because they were in a loving family. I was calmer than all of them, which, I don't really have any explanation for that, but I was surrounded by chaos at the same time, and they were not. So it was very interesting to compare and contrast, because you can't help but formulate the conclusion that, okay, this isn't normal, and it's actually sick and wrong.
Yeah. When you reflect back, even growing up, say in your junior high school years, or even as a kid, do you notice yourself either growing up really quickly, or do you notice some types of ways that you just protected yourself that you think, I should not be doing that young? I don't need to be that person. When you reflect back?
Yes, most definitely.
What?
In a word, yes.
Yes.
Yes, I think it goes along with being that person naturally that people felt comfortable talking to. But also meant that when my mom was going through something, she was going to come to me. My younger sister is only 15 months younger than I am, and we have completely different personalities. So there was very little processing that went on between my mom and her, but quite a bit of leaning on me. And then I noticed my aunts would also do it. My friends at school would do it. Sometimes other people's parents would do it. And I was aware that I was very, very different from my peers, because I already knew so much about human experience, and a lot of it was dark.
Yeah. And I feel like you're too young to be hearing about all of these adult problems and dramas.
Yes. I mean, in an ideal, perfect situation, kids would, they're going to be subject to that at some point. But, mine was not the ideal for a lot of people. However, I didn't think of it that way, because it was just my life. That was who I was. That's where I was. And it's, of course, it led into other things as an adult, like a toxic career choice. And that was just the start of it. And it led to all kinds of different things, but that was just me. That was who I was. That was our situation. And I knew it wasn't normal. And how I coped the best was getting away. As soon as I got my driver's
avoiding.
license, I was gone.
Yeah.
And I needed to get out. I worked as much as I could when I was in high school, when I had the ability to do it out of the house, which was, of course, that was most jobs back then.
Mm-hmm.
And I just tried to get away as much as I could, because I knew that when I came back, I would have to deal with it again. And you never knew. On a given night, you could come back from work and find my mom, quiet and content, which was mostly because she had passed out, actually, or in a fit of rage and fighting, and you just never knew.
Mm-hmm.
The uncertainty was the order of the day.
Was it yours and your sister's responsibility to take care of her if she's the only adult?
No. Happily, she was pretty high functioning.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's worse.
No, it was pretty bad.
Yeah.
It was pretty bad.
They know what they're doing almost.
Yes. And I didn't know how she did it. She also was a chain smoker and smoked probably at least 2 or 3 packs of cigarettes a day, starting with it was in bed when she woke up in the morning. And
Wow.
I didn't know how her health held up, but she seemed to possess this will to keep going. My parents divorced in 1980, and they've both gotten remarried. My mom's second marriage lasted until 1986. That was also to an alcoholic. Those were difficult years. I left the house as much as I could. That didn't end well. Just came home to sleep. Yeah, it didn't end well. And she went back to work. So she would be extraordinarily high functioning as an alcoholic. She wouldn't be drunk at work, but would make up for it when she came home.
Wow.
Yeah. And unfortunately, she was a nurse, a critical care nurse, day shift, and she would come home and start drinking, usually about the same time that we would come home from school. So we would have to interact more than I wanted
would have liked
to.
It.
Yeah.
How much resentment did you hold throughout the years?
Too much, especially.
And how did that show up?
It showed up in just a kind of dull sort of numbness. That's the best way I can describe it. I didn't really think of myself as depressed until I left mediation, and I was in my early 40s. I'm now 50, and I didn't really think of myself as operating under a state of depression because we didn't really talk about it, and society didn't identify that as much. So people weren't talking about it. I just knew that I had a kind of I wasn't really a meanness to me, but a chronic dissatisfaction.
Like a coldness, or just, I think numb is a good way to describe it.
I think it's more of a numbness, and I would want to break out of it. But there was just a deep dissatisfaction. And I knew that from spiritual practice, which I kept going back to, that it was because I needed to take a look at all of this and deal with it in a constructive way, rather than my MO, which was either to pick a fight with my mom or to avoid it, because it would always come up. And of course you take it with you because it's in your mind. So a change of scenery doesn't exactly help.
No, well, you're not going through any of the emotions or dealing with the conflict at all. You're really just bottling it up and really just poisoning yourself.
Right. And, it led to a poisonous career choice, and it led to a first marriage, which has now ended, but it led to some hostility, some domestic hostility as well, because we do as human beings what is familiar to us, what smells familiar, really.
Yeah. And all you've been taught.
Yes, and that's what we end up gravitating toward. And at some point, we begin to wonder why and what can I do to stop this? And eventually I hit that wall.
And during your upbringing, during when you were in the household, like I've heard so many stories about people having alcoholic parents, and just hearing some of the stories and the situations that they get themselves in. Like what kind of stuff happened to you in terms of, yeah, you mentioned domestic, maybe fighting and whatnot. Like what else like happened growing up?
Well, we had some awful situations that are sad. I mean, they're just sad that at the time we thought were normal. And my mom would often pass out wherever she happened to find herself, at the kitchen table, sometimes on the couch, and would talk in her sleep, which sometimes was actually quite funny if it weren't for the fact that she was pass out drunk.
Yeah.
And again, which was sad, but she said some very interesting things. And I would sometimes have friends over working on school projects, and she would start getting drunk. So I would have to go to school and talk about it with
Deal with
my
that
friends
gossip and people
the
talking
next
about
day.
it. Yeah.
And they were talking about it, which didn't make me feel very good at
It's
all.
embarrassing.
Yes, very much, very much. And that was high school. And, really after that, after I moved out and was on my own, the abuse still took place because she was still drinking and would call and want to get into a fight or text. Once cell phones came out, she loved to text
And just
nastiness.
rage. Yeah. Like rage text you.
Yes, rage texting, trying to, I don't know what she was really trying to do other than
Yeah.
she
What
was
was some of the nastiness?
hurting.
Like what was she raging about?
She was raging, trying to put a guilt trip on me, usually for not being a good son, for moving away. Thank God I moved away. Different state. Thank you. Yes.
As far away as you can get.
I went pretty far. Yeah. Luckily. And it still wasn't far enough to get away from all of that. And it just got worse and worse. And as I practiced spirituality, as I went deeper with my own journey, the more egregious her behavior became. And at some point, at one point, I finally realized, okay, I am able to put some healthy boundaries on this. And what really got her to stop was, at one point, I simply told her that I'm not going to be treated this way. And I had kids at the time who are still her, well, they were, she passed away in 2016, but they were her only grandkids at the time. And I told her, I'm not going to facilitate a relationship between you. This is your behavior, and this is what it's been like over the years for me. I refuse to be treated this way. So if you're not going to treat me differently, then we're not going to speak. And that was period, end of discussion. And it felt really immediately lighter and good. And I was in my early 40s. So, if people out there are struggling with this, it took me until I was 42-ish.
It's phenomenal. The rage texting is something I'll never understand. Like I have friends that have parents dealing with similar demons, let's say, as your mom did, and taking it out on the people that love them the most, which is always the hardest part. And someone from the outside looking in, I'm sure their advice is, well, just block her number. Don't answer it. Delete her number, change your number so she can't reach you. Why don't people of situations like this, dealing with alcoholics, why does it take so long for them to set the boundary?
I think because we get so used to it. I mean, if someone has an alcoholic parent, that, like we've been talking about, is the norm. It's what life is like. This is what families are like. This is what relationships are like, full of conflict. So what career did I choose? Conflict resolution. Oh. I mean, that clearly smelled familiar to me.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it almost gives you a second chance where it's like, I can't figure out my own family, but so let me mediate everyone else's.
Well, and I never really truly thought of it that way. I didn't know why I was in it, to be perfectly
Really?
honest with you. Yeah, it didn't occur to me, especially at first. I mean, it just didn't occur to me. I didn't think about it. And that's how mechanical I had become, and numb to all of this really abnormal behavior and
Yeah.
aberrant and just a load of crap that people would dish out to each other every hour. And then I'd put a different file out on the table, open it up, skim it, and two new people would walk into the door with the same shit as before.
What do you think? We can go down two avenues. First question I have is, what were your mom's demons? Like, what caused her to be an alcoholic in your eyes?
She never had a very good sense of what we would call self-esteem. She didn't think very highly of herself. And honestly, I can see where some of this came from. She was raised by really old school parents, my grandparents, whom I loved dearly. I had a great relationship with them, but they were hard on all of their kids and had very, very high expectations that the kids could never meet. So she grew up feeling and thinking that she was less than, that she had a very limited place in the world. She was only to do certain things, to go certain places, to marry a certain kind of man, which she actually didn't, because my dad didn't meet any of those molds at all.
Maybe
So
that was her rebelling.
it was her rebelling. And I understand where some of that came from, but other parts of that, it's kind of tough to understand when you're in the midst of it.
Yeah. It's only when you're reflecting back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What drew you into, I know you said that you were always kind of had an inkling towards spirituality, but what finally got you to jump into A Course in Miracles?
Well, I was really fortunate to see Dr. Wayne Dyer live before he passed.
Wow. What year?
2012.
Wow.
It
Where?
was amazing. A Wanderlust festival in California, in the
So cool.
Sierras, a place called Squaw Valley. It's where they had
Whoa.
the 1960 Winter Olympics. It's in the Tahoe area.
Okay. Yeah.
And Cindy, who's now my wife, we were dating. She was my girlfriend at the time. We went down to this festival with friends, and yoga has been something that I've loved to do practice for years. And I saw Wayne Dyer live, and he mentioned A Course in Miracles a couple of times. And
Of course.
I knew right then and there I had to go out and buy it. And then he didn't really talk about it. His talk was not about A Course in Miracles, but
you could tell the themes were stemming from that.
They were. And it was really clear that it had had quite an impact on him, which was really interesting.
I know for me, the biggest part of A Course in Miracles that really hit home for me and something that I had to work on was forgiveness without closure. And I was like, this is effing radical.
Yes.
Because where I always came from is, why the hell do I need to forgive someone, or why must I do that when I did not do a damn thing wrong? And I felt so justified in that anger until I understood the way of A Course in Miracles is forgiving someone without them knowing you're forgiving them is releasing you of all that anger finally.
It does.
And I'm like, oh.
Yeah. You just hit on something that's really, really beautiful, because when people start studying this, that's one of the things that I think makes the least amount of sense is, wait a minute, this whole thing is about forgiveness. This entire thing is about forgiveness. This is what I'm supposed to do. But he did this, she did that.
Yes.
To me, right?
They're the idiots. I did nothing wrong.
Yeah. And we want to have our own righteous indignation. And it's just something that requires a lot of practice and a lot of study. And the beauty of it is you just mentioned it, they don't even have to know.
I know, but
isn't that cool?
Sure, it is now. But for me, it's like I obviously I've grown a little bit, but before A Course in Miracles and before I understood this way of thinking, for me, it's like, I need you to know what you did wrong. I feel righteous in that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm changing because I do agree. The moment I forgive someone within me, I feel lighter. And that's all I really, that was the end goal anyways. It's funny to still get that same outcome without making them wrong. Because
Yes.
before I would have got joy and the outcome out of making them wrong. That's where I would have got all my pleasure.
Exactly. I think that's where a lot of us would do it. And we forgive and keep a sense of separation firmly intact because people want to punish, and they still want to punish because, I mean, somebody might have done some really nasty things.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And you want to remind them of it and point out everything they did wrong and remind them of all the help they need to go get.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. And you know that you're so cool and they suck. And this is why you suck. And
I'm on the path of betterment and you're doing nothing to change.
Yeah. I'm cool. You suck. And I've been compiling a list for decades. Decades.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, it's just so interesting that you mentioned forgiveness, because I mean, this is A Course in Miracles presents it really differently. Forgiveness in the world, it's like a negotiation. If you change your behavior, then I'll forgive you. It still maintains a sense of separation. And in the thought system of A Course in Miracles, there is no separation at all, period, and never has been. So ultimately, what we're doing is we're forgiving somebody for what they did not do to us, which is a major, major radical shift.
Mm-hmm. So go in deeper than that. So use it for an example of having an alcoholic mother growing up, because you did literally nothing wrong, but yet for you to get closure and betterment from being raised that way, you have to forgive her. It's so backwards in most people's mind.
Right, exactly. And that is the way that we see it. In fact, the Course is 180 degrees different than the way we've been raised.
Explain it how the Course explains it, where it's basically saying your mom didn't do anything wrong or to you.
Yes, we're having an experience that is something that a lot of spiritual traditions talk about, and some of them go into more depth than others. But we're having an experience where everything that we see is, in fact, a projection. It is an image, like an image on a screen, like we are right here. These are images on screens talking to people, and they're watching projected images on a screen. That's what our entire life is like. It's going on in our own mind. What we see outside is a reflection of what's going on in our own mind, which is a major eye-opener. And it's one that plenty of people are not ready to digest and accept. However, there's so many spiritual traditions that present this, that people have access to modernly, that it's not the strangest of ideas to a lot of folks. But we're watching our own movie, and everything that we see is symbolic of what's going on inside of us. So when we see a beautiful sunset or a beach, that's symbolic of our own beauty, our own limitlessness, right? Our own radiance, joy, love. And when we see someone flip us off, that's symbolic of our own fear as something that is going on in our own mind. So when we forgive the person that flips us off, they don't have to know about it. You can choose to get away from them. I mean, the most skillful thing is not to do it back, of course, but hey, you know, everybody slips up.
Yes, right? We do.
We all slip up. And what we're doing is we're acknowledging on a deep level that there's never been any separation. So in other words, in the thought system of A Course in Miracles, there's never been any separation from our source, which a lot of people refer to as God, but someone else may refer to by a different name.
The universe, or
the universe, it could be one, our higher self, source with a capital S.
So at what points did you finally realize I need to forgive everything my mom acted
Well,
like and her behavior and did? And
yeah, so interesting now that looking back, now that I teach A Course in Miracles, it's so interesting the resistance that I encountered to it as somebody who has devoted his entire life to spiritual
resistance in
practice. Oh yeah,
forgiving or resistance from other people understanding that you're going to
no,
forgive?
no, forgive my own resistance.
So yeah, you're teaching people you have to forgive, you have to forgive. You're like, but I'm not ready to forgive.
Well, I wasn't at first, and that was
Yeah.
before I started to teach. I didn't do that until 2018. I was invited to start teaching it, and I've been invited to teach in a couple of different forums since then, but I've really had to do the work. That's the cool thing about it, is there's nothing special about me. I'm just a dude that's studying the course like everybody else. So, there's nothing high and mighty. I'm not a prophet or anything. It's just my calling to turn on the camera and microphone, that's all. And it looks different for everybody, but I resisted that because I thought, well, I'm not ready to do that. What about my mom? She's still texting me all this horse shit, and did you hear what she said the other day, type thing, and how can I do that? And I went deeper into it and recognized, okay, well, this is my own resistance, and if I do it this way, I finally, about a year into it, recognized that I can actually do this deep level forgiveness and set a healthy boundary here in the world, as in I'm not going to take this anymore, and go about the deep level work on my own without her ever knowing. And she never did. She never did, because I never shared
again,
that
like I
with
said,
her.
that is the hardest parts for me. It's doing all the work and the forgiveness and them not validating that I'm better because I did the work, but you still suck.
Oh yeah. Well, as I did it, what I recognized right away is I felt lighter, like you said a few minutes ago.
Let me put context to all of this. Like, I've done the forgiveness and the closure, and I can guarantee you it feels good, like the lightness.
Yeah.
But it sucked going through it.
Exactly.
And it still sucks them not knowing that I'm lighter. So I still got some stuff to let go.
Well, and people may or may not acknowledge it, but that's the cool thing about the course to me, is it's not a religion. There's no head of it or anything. It's a self-study course. So you do the work as you're called, and people may or may not notice, but I'm betting that if you're showing up a different person, calmer, more joyful, more lighthearted, people do notice.
Yeah.
They may not say anything, right? Maybe not.
No, I would agree.
But sometimes we do want that external validation. Yeah. Of can you just acknowledge the great effort that I've gone to? Please. Please.
But it just goes to show, if I still need that validation, then I haven't learned enough yet.
Well,
that's the next level.
Yeah, I think that there's always something else, because you can look at it this way, and this is something that I've studied Buddhism, and so some of these ideas from A Course in Miracles were pretty familiar to me. It's why it made so much sense. And there's always a next level, because there's always something else, and literally anything that makes us angry or frustrates us or makes anything that triggers us is an opportunity for forgiveness. And eventually what happens is it becomes an attitude. It becomes more automatic, and we reach a point where we're no longer really having to force ourselves to do it. And a good gauge of that I always want to share with people is, think about when you started your own spiritual path, whatever that is. What were you like as a person? And what are you like now? Which could be next week, or it could be years later. What are you like now? Are you more forgiving? And if you experience the same situation now that would have caused you to fly off the handle several years ago, and you handle it totally differently, and you're cool,
Yeah.
then that's a really good indication, because day to day, moment to moment, we could have a crappy day and we don't think we're making any progress, or we feel like we're backsliding because something hits us and we become depressed or anxious and worry all day, or we're sick, we fall ill or something,
Yeah.
and we feel awful. And we think we're backsliding on the path. So it can be really helpful to take a look at that. What I also love to share with people is that nothing's ever wasted.
What do you mean by that?
Nothing's ever wasted. Any prayer, any act of forgiveness, any meditation is never wasted.
Mm-hmm.
It's never wasted on the path, because it's the effort that people are making that really matters.
Mm.
That means that people are listening to this inner voice that we all share, that's compelling us to study this, saying there's got to be something else out there. I don't want to feel this way. There's got to be a different way of living. There's got to be more to it than just simply showing up, checking email, cooking dinner, and going to sleep and doing the same thing again tomorrow, again and again. But there's more to it than that, and there is.
I agree. Last question for you before you go. A lot of people resist spirituality because they coincide it with religion. So if someone is starting to realize, these are two separate things, and I could probably gain a lot of value from spirituality without the religious aspect, if they're interested in going down that spiritual route, what should they start with, or what are some of the first steps?
Oh man, that's, I think that there's never been a better time to me. This is the only time there is, of course, but
of course,
naturally, the past is gone, but there's never been a better time than right now, because every major spiritual tradition in the world is accessible at our fingertips on the internet. We can seek out information, we can seek out people and community if that's what someone needs. All of the information is readily available. And I think that the world societies have done a really good job, by and large, of now starting to differentiate spirituality from religion. And I think that this is something that's much more in the common parlance, much more in common knowledge. And I started to notice that in the 1990s. Where people really started to en masse say, okay, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious, which I can relate to completely.
Me too.
Yeah. And it's very common all over the world. And what I would recommend people do is, we all have this inner voice that, if something, there are many doors in spirituality. And what's universal is the experience of waking up. Love is universal. That's the truth of who we are. So ultimately, we're all headed to the same place. So to speak. That's a metaphor, of course, because there's no place to be. We're simply removing our own stuff from the equation and allowing truth to be as it is. So there's many, many ways to do that. And if I would say to somebody, if they're compelled to investigate a certain tradition, or more than one tradition further, do it. Just do it. Approach one of these doors and open it up. And it doesn't matter if you're afraid to open it up, actually, because that's part of the process. But the benefits are amazing. And, people have access to all of this material. So, listen to the podcast by people that you like and feel drawn to, read the materials. If it's A Course in Miracles, it's that. If it's something else, it's something else. But there are a lot of different ways for people to start this journey.
Besides A Course in Miracles, what's one book you would recommend someone that's intrigued about going down a spiritual journey?
Okay. I really love the book, The Four Agreements.
I haven't read it yet, but it's on my list.
Okay. Yeah. And that one, Domingo Ruiz, is really, really good. And one of the agreements is do your best. And that means with the acknowledgement that your best is going to vary from day to day, because one day you're going to be sick, the next day you're going to be bombarded, and what constitutes really, really good for you is going to look differently, but it's the effort that counts, and that's something that's really, really powerful. That's only one of the four, but I think that one's really good because it's general spirituality and it's quite accessible to a lot of people.
Okay, good. And before I let you go, if anyone wants to connect further with you, please plug everywhere they can.
Okay. Well, thank you. Yeah, my website is tomasgarza.com, and that's all one word. And that's a good place. And YouTube is a great place. My YouTube channel is something that I've really been working on. And I'm doing a series of videos on A Course in Miracles. So people can hop in. It's Reverend Tomás Garza on YouTube. That's the easiest and the best. I'm also on Facebook and Facebook, Instagram, and email is good. Tomas, Tomas, at tomasgarza.com.
And Tomás, last but not least, we've bounced around on a bunch of different topics. We've dove a little deeper into your childhood. We talked a lot about your career in the past, and we've also talked about kind of the joys of spirituality and obviously the value in forgiveness. So without giving too much specific encouragement, if anyone is kind of either going through something with an alcoholic parent or sibling or significant other, or maybe things have just happened in their past or current situation that they're like, I should probably forgive someone. Any words of encouragement just overall?
Number one, they don't have to know. And you really don't have to call them up and have a tearful conversation or email or write them or anything like that. They don't have to know. And the benefits are to really primarily the forgiver. Ultimately, there's no difference between the person being forgiven and the forgiver, but because this is all a projection on our screen, who's benefiting? We're benefiting. And do you want to be lighter? Do you want to be happier? Do you want your life to flow better, have more purpose, and get unstuck? Then yeah, and it's, you do what you can. If you're not ready to go deep with somebody that's abused you, for example, the pattern of abuse or an abusive ex or something like that, then, just do what you're capable of. Forgive the dog for peeing on the carpet or something. But
absolutely,
just start with what you're capable of, because life is happening for our benefit, so that we can seize on these opportunities.
Tomás, thank you so much for being here. I often find a lot of people with very calm energy when I do these podcasts. I must just attract them in, but yours especially is very like calm, spiritual nature, and it was nice to have, especially knowing that the rest of my day is going to be pretty busy and back into real estate mode. We're out of podcast mode as of now, but we're going into real estate mode for the rest of the day, and it's nice going into that with just the lens of forgiveness, the lens of the world and life is happening for you, and the lens of just like to remind yourselves of just be lighter, and that all we have is now. So I appreciate going into my day after this conversation. So thank you.
Oh yeah, thank you. I'm happy that I was able to join you. Thanks so much.
Of course. Did you know that I'm not only a podcast host, but in my full-time career, I am a Toronto-based real estate agent. In 2021, I closed 100 deals. Yes, you heard that correctly, 100. So if you or someone you know is a busy professional looking to get into the Toronto real estate market and looking to work with a realtor who values your time, make sure to reach out to me and let's get connected. And in the meantime, we'll see you here back next week.